Hi, and welcome to Grace Speaks. My name is Chris Carpio, and I'm one of your hosts here, and I'm joined with...
Alexa Moran, one of your other hosts.
And Katya Gonzalez.
And we have a special guest, as usual, the man who leads this ship, I guess is one way of saying it.
My.
And he's great. You all look up to him. His name is...
He's begging for a bonus.
Yeah, right?
His name is Armin Sommer.
That is I.
Anyways,
Yes.
we are we are continuing our series called Behind the Sermon, where we get a sneak peek behind what the pastors do to kind of craft the sermons that you hear on a Sunday morning, the intentionality that goes behind it, the prayer that goes behind it, the inspiration that goes behind it. And for this week, we're kind of doing the behind the sermon as we close out the series.
Kind of a rear view mirror. Not
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually we've done it where we're going into the series, but I almost feel like it's like kind of appropriate to do it at the end of this one, because the series that we've been in is called Leaving Corinth, and the reason it's called that is because we're finishing our series in Corinth, right?
Because we had, Welcome to Corinth, Back to Corinth, Resurrection. And
Yeah, that was part of the Corinth
Yeah,
series,
because that was
yeah.
technically part of the Corinth series.
Right.
And then now Leaving Corinth. Did I miss any? That was all of them, right?
I think that was all of them.
And they were all billboards.
They were all billboards except for the
Except
resurrection
Resurrection.
one. Which,
Oh, yeah.
Which I actually, in retrospect, we should have probably designed it as a billboard.
Kept the continuity.
Yeah.
Because there were a lot of people thought that we were doing a topical series, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was really about 1 Corinthians 15, and
Yeah.
and Paul talks about the resurrection, and it's like, well,
I did
yeah.
like that design, though. That was
I
a
actually
nice
I
really
liked the
did,
design.
too.
I
Yeah.
did too. Yeah.
Yeah. So for our first question, since before we started recording this, I called it our multiverse series because we've been in and out of Corinth so much.
Kind of a
But
little
it's
Stephen Hawking-ish.
but
Yeah.
it's all been tied together throughout the years. Years has it been?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
well,
has
it's
been
been like
years.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years. Yeah.
2.5, 3. something
Yeah.
like that.
And I guess so. Looking back, kind of reflectively, what has been your hope as we've gone through this series that you've seen kind of like a reoccurring theme that you've been hoping people
Yeah.
might kind of latch on to?
Like, why did we do this?
Yeah, like what was the purpose?
The inspiration behind it really goes back many years to a conversation I had with a fellow pastor. And I mean, probably like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And he was a friend of mine who was a pastor at Island Baptist Church in off on Long Beach Island.
Oh yeah.
Down in South Jersey. And he said he was doing a series in 1 Corinthians because every church needs to pay attention to 1 Corinthians because every church today exists in Corinth. And I think it's really true. A lot
I
of
think
this-
that's
Yeah.
really true
yeah,
too.
That's
a lot of
actually
the
really
issues
accurate.
that Corinth faced and that the Corinthians experienced are present in our culture today. And so I had discussed it originally with Pastor Shegun Ayabusi, who is now our man in Nigeria,
Yeah.
in Jos, Nigeria, ministering there. Used to be on staff here and was one of our right-hand guys on the teaching team. And when we discussed it, we really believed that it was relevant because it hit the whole idea of factionalism. I mean, like, over this past year and a half, I have seen more factions arise within the churches. And I mean, when I say the church, I mean not only our church, but the church in America. That it's not just polarizing. It's like every point on the compass where people are, dealing, especially with regard to COVID and all the accompanying controversies for COVID, and so that was something that we needed to talk about. And not only that, it was a phenomenon that when we began the teaching team, I realized that one of the downsides could be that people would say, oh, so-and-so is my favorite teacher. Well, he's really my teacher. And then we
Yeah.
started the 6 p.m. and Pastor Shegun became the primary communicator there. and I realized that even though I personally had to come to terms with the idea that people would have a favorite teacher other than me, of course, that it was really important for the church to realize that we are one. And so there was that. Plus, you got to realize I grew up during the sexual revolution of the 60s, and where, the advent of birth control pill and all of that kind of stuff. That was that was really new back then.
Yeah.
And yet the sexual revolution has taken on so many additional dimensions since then. It needed to be dealt with, and of course, 1 Corinthians deals with that.
Yeah.
It deals with the issue of even legal issues and conflict between members. Then, as you get further into Corinthians, the interaction of the body in terms of its giftedness, and people being responsible to serve the body and to build up the body of Christ, and that's what the purpose of the gifts are. But then also getting into the more controversial gifts, the charismatic gifts. It was something that we had never really addressed.
Yeah.
And every viewpoint on the gifts, and what I mean especially tongues, prophecy, miracles, such gifts as those have varying viewpoints within the church, and there's a lot of disagreement.
That's true.
And I felt it was important to address those gifts in a way that was balanced, that that wasn't debunking, but also wasn't requiring their exercise. And my viewpoints on it have really changed a lot. I used to be, when I first came out of seminary, I was what was known as a cessationist. I believed that those gifts had ceased, and now I don't believe that. And that was mainly because of the teaching to which I'd been exposed. But then when I personally began to dig into it a little bit more myself, my viewpoint on it changed. And then when you get to the resurrection, and a lot of people misunderstand what the resurrection is really about. They confuse it with life after death, and there's a big difference between that. And one of the pivotal books that informed me, or really motivated me to dig into it more, was N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, which is sort of his masterpiece work, his magnum opus, a major work of his life. And when I read that, it was really eye-opening, and I thought people need to understand this. And then, of course, the farewell to Corinth. It was like, okay, we got to the end of chapter 15, so we're like, what do we skip chapter 16? It's the end. And he starts out talking about the offering. He wasn't talking about tithing or anything like that. He was talking about the offering, and it was important to deal with that. And then at the end of that, he's basically saying, and say hello to this person and that person, and do this and
in
that.
typical Paul fashion.
And, kind of grow up. And I thought, well, every word, every verse is inspired, so there must be something in this for us. And that was those were actually very difficult messages, because you're kind of digging below the surface, like what is there for the people?
Like, why did God inspire Paul to say this?
This is like God breathed, or is it like an afterthought?
It's like, bye everyone, okay, like that kind of deal.
And so I purposely, it's going to sound funny, and he wouldn't be embarrassed. I purposely gave Scott the second passage in it, because I, as a fairly relatively freshly minted campus pastor, I wanted to give him a hard passage and see what he came up with. And he did a really good job with it. It was really good. And I thought, all right. Kudos to you, Scott.
That's awesome.
And then I figured I would give myself the last one, mainly because I began the series and I wanted to close the series. Simple as that.
Bringing it home,
Really
kind of like
Yeah.
Paul did.
Yeah, I just wanted to, where he said, I'm writing this with my own hand. I wanted to say it with my own lips.
Yeah.
And realizing that I only have a few messages left to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This last week I just wrote the draft of my second to the last message, and it felt really weird.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because you also send that email to the congregation like, oh, this is getting real. So this will be my question, because you kind of went into it. How does that feel? Like, kind of, you're closing this series and now you're coming, how does that feel for you?
It's sobering in some respects, because I don't think of it in terms of like ending ministry. Although some people think, oh, well, you shouldn't retire. Of course, I have my proof text from back in, is it Numbers or Second Chronicles, where it talks about priests when they get to age, I think it was age 50, they were to retire. And so I have that written inside my Bible for anybody who says, I don't believe in retirement. I said, well, the Bible talks about it one time.
Right.
But so retirement for me is going to be doing ministry in a different way. So one of the things that I'm going to do, I would imagine, is to do some speaking, some preaching in the future. I just don't know exactly how that will play out. I'm also going to, you may want to cut this from the podcast, but I auditioned as a reader and narrator for Audible.com. Did I tell you already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not on the podcast, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm going to be doing that. And
so you can hear more of Armin.
Yeah, you can look up Armin Sommer as your reader on Audible.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure
I only
tons
listen
of people
to
will do that.
Armin Sommer read books.
Do you think they actually have people I only listen to I don't know, Katya when she reads a book. Otherwise,
I think
don't.
they have a favorite.
Yeah,
reader.
there definitely are favorite readers.
They
There's
have trading cards.
Really?
No.
Readers, yes.
Oh my gosh.
Are you going to be on a trading
We're
card?
making
I doubt
Armin
it.
Please
Sommer
sign mine.
trading
I doubt
cards.
it, but they
Sign
actually,
mine.
for some of the
Plus
really
5 for
high-profile
angelic
readers,
voice.
they have actually baseball cards.
Wait, that's so cool.
Well, I think it's stupid, but that's all right.
If you get a card,
Yeah,
can
but
you
you
send it
low-key
to
think
us
it's
though?
cool.
I would love
I doubt
that.
very much that I'll. So I have to fill out a profile. The very first project I'm going to do, really is a sample for on my profile for trolling for authors, because it's not automatic. They have to find that you're a good match for an author.
Right.
And so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to record the Psalms and Proverbs for the church and make that available.
Oh,
That's
And then
pretty
I'll probably
cool.
record
that
a couple
is.
of my stories.
That's cool. I think people are definitely going to want to listen to that.
Yeah,
I hope
sure.
so. And the way I'm going to do the Psalms is I'm not going to do I'm not going to do commentary, but I will do a brief little introduction for each one. Say, I'll provide the actual original superscription, written to the tune of the lilies, by David, a miktam, or whatever, give that, and then a 2 or maybe 3 sentence introduction of when this and why this was written.
Yeah.
If
That
they
would,
know.
yeah, that would actually be really cool.
That would
And
be
it'll add 10 seconds to the to each one, but then go through, record all 150 psalms and make them available.
Wow.
And I'd record them probably from the New Coverdale Psalter, which is the psalms as they are written in the Book of Common Prayer that the International, let's see, what is it? The Anglican Church of North America has put together. It's really good. I often use the Book of Common Prayer just in personal worship and devotion.
Cool.
And a lot of it's kind of like, I got into that when my son-in-law was toying with the idea of becoming an Anglican, and there's some really cool stuff in it. I like it. It goes back to the 16th century.
Oh, that is cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to bring us back a little bit to the
Yeah,
behind
sorry.
the story. No, that's awesome. But you kind of started talking about this, but I want to dive in specifically to the sermon you just did about Paul saying goodbye and all of that stuff as well. Why do you feel that's so important? Because you said it was a struggle to kind of really get, because like you said, it's God breathed, so obviously, and God inspired. So there's truth and worth in it. So
Right.
why do you feel like this last section of chapter 16 was so like very important for us to do?
Well, he gave a closing statement in 1 Corinthians 16:13, where he said, "Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, or be steadfast, be strong," and I'm missing one in there, but he gave this string of several commandments to people, and when he did that, that was really his pronunciation of that kind of a final thought, like, hey, this is the most important thing to remember out of all of these things I've said to you. And then he gave the examples of these different people in his life with whom he was in community. And so there was Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Achaicus, and they were the first believers who came to faith in Asia, and it's almost certain that he was the one that led them to Christ. And then he talked about Priscilla and Aquila,
Right.
and they're the ones who had pulled Apollos aside, and when they heard him teaching, they taught him more fully in the things of God, and they were pivotal in Paul's ministry in Corinth and in Ephesus. They actually, relocated to be involved with him in ministry. And so these were all these special people who were involved in his life that helped him to grow and partnered with him in community. And that was one of the reasons why when I spoke about being resilient as a Christian, I chose to use them as examples of people with whom he was in community. And I started out with my sister, talking about her in my introduction, my sister Jennifer in Iowa. And I have another sister in New Hampshire. But my sister in Iowa is a really strong follower of Christ. And she listened, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask
she watched. Yeah. I let her know that I was going to be talking about her. And of course, she was like, "You're not going to say anything bad, are you?"
It's like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
She's
Well, she
like,
wanted
"Let
to know.
me
And
make
I
sure."
said, "Sorry, you got to listen,"
Yeah.
And but she was, I think she was really kind of touched by it. But she's been through an awful lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't talk about everything
Right.
that she's been through. I left some stuff out. But
Yeah, no, but like when you used her as an example, I had like this admiration for her, like to go through all of that and still just be so thankful to God for everything.
Yeah.
Like that's such an admirable trait, and it's something we should like work on. And it's like what you said, it's a muscle. It's like it's not like it comes naturally, like you're always going to be thankful in the hardships, but it's something that you have to keep working on, that resilience. So I think that in the sermon that you highlighted and then using her as an example really emphasized what Paul was also trying to say to us as like a parting thought, like be vigilant, but also, be ready at the same time. Like hardships will come and all that, but
it's inevitable, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having seen my sister go through, she's a year older than I am, and having seen everything that she has gone through, she's in many respects a simple person. Now, I don't mean stupid. I mean just simple in her approach to life.
like down to earth kind of deal.
Yeah, very, and she takes a very simple approach to life. She has a college degree. She was a school teacher. She went to the University of Northern Iowa, but she's lived in Iowa since 1969. She went to college there, at University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls, and she married a guy from Iowa. And my siblings would, and frankly, I would sometimes make fun of her, but my brother, who is he's a brilliant guy. He's just to give you an example, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but he's a transplant surgeon. But when he was working on his fellowship, figured it might be helpful to have a PhD in immunology too. So
At the
he
same
went
time?
he went and got a PhD in immunology and wrote a book on stuff, and which I have in my library, which I've never really read. but it looks nice there.
Right.
We won't tell him that.
Well, if he
knows.
listens to the podcast, so.
No, he won't. But he knows. And then when just how smart he is. When he retired, he well, actually not when he retired. He was working at Downstate Medical Center in New York City as a head guy in transplants. He figured it might be helpful to get an MBA, so he went and got a Master of Business Administration.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
really?
He's like
Why'd
walking
you
down
do
the street
that?
instead of like going to get tacos, he's like, I'm just going to get an MBA.
Yeah, he went and got an MBA, and so he did that. But he has grown in his appreciation for my sister Jennifer because he sees how she has handled difficulties.
Wow.
And seen the solidity of her, especially of her biological children.
Yeah.
Her adoptive kids have had significant challenges, largely because of where they came from.
Yeah.
Which I mentioned briefly in
Right.
the sermon. But yeah. So where was I going with this? I have no idea.
I'm like, well, we were just saying how, like, to talk about the spiritual resilience and why that was important to
Yeah.
emphasize.
Yeah.
It started from, I think, 1 Corinthians 16:13.
Yeah.
It says, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong.
Yeah. Be strong. Do everything in love.
Yeah, and then you were using your sister as a
Yeah.
illustration of that.
Yeah. It's when I do my little retirement tour in the fall, I'm going to probably stop by and see my sister, spend a few days with her.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
that's awesome.
Get
Yeah,
some
that'd be good.
corn.
Huh?
Get some corn. That's what
It'll
I
be
was
too
known
late for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't see her until December.
Nice try.
Yeah.
I was just saying.
Nice thought, anyway. Maybe some canned corn.
There you go. Dried corn, is that a thing?
I don't know. Yeah.
So, Armin, was there anything that surprised you when not only working on this series, but from working on that sermon too?
You mean this last one? Yeah. What surprised me was what welled up in me as when Paul said, I, Paul, write this with my own hand, greet one another with a holy kiss. And he really talked about devotion to really one another in the church. And he was telling them, really, don't approach church as a consumer, approach it more as a family. And what I hear,
Got a good amen out of that
Yeah,
one.
we were all like,
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a family.
Preach it.
there's just so much that I see, and I don't mean simply in our church. I mean
Like
in the church in general,
Yeah.
where people will say, "Oh, they'll go to one church for a while and they say, oh, I'm really not getting. I want something fresh, and I'm going to go on to somebody else, or I'm not really feeling terribly fed there." And I'm like, good grief, you wouldn't say that to your family.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
You wouldn't say. There was even, well, I can say this. There was a person that said he was surprised that I wasn't talking about certain things in the sermons, and that he didn't find what I was saying tasteful. And I said, well, let me put it to you this way. You've been married how long? And he mentioned how long he's been married. And I said, What did your wife prepare? Does your wife cook for you? Does she? Oh yeah, she cooks for me. I said, what did she prepare for you last Wednesday?
Oh, because he was mentioning
Yeah.
how he can't really recall.
Yeah, anything. And I said, what did she make for you? I don't remember. Well, what about Thursday? Well, I don't remember. And I said, well, I would venture to say that probably 99% of the meals, or some percentage, over the last few months that have been served to you and prepared lovingly by your spouse, you can't recall what they are, but if you hadn't eaten them, you'd be in pretty bad shape. And that's, in fact, we discussed that in teaching team today.
Yeah.
We missed you there, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Sports camp.
But yeah, I know. But we discussed in teaching team today that instead of really hitting on hot topics generally, what we what we try to do is use a more meat and potatoes type of approach at Grace. Like, what is it that people need to hear? Well, they need to hear the systematic teaching of the Word of God.
Right.
And so that involves, so that's why I like 1 Corinthians. That's why, for example, years ago, that was why I did Romans. Because Romans is a book that everybody needs to hear because of the profound doctrinal themes that are included in that and the way that Paul teaches that. And one of the ones that we were talking about on teaching team today is that we're going to do Philippians because it has to do with people living joyfully, but also not out of their preferences, out of concern for one another. And then we're going to be doing 1 John too, or I should say the teaching team is going to do 1 John because it'll be that has to do with some of the 1 John has to do with 3 basic tests of what it means really and truly to be a believer and a follower of Jesus. And so there are all these reasons that go into it. I don't often discuss those like, here's why I'm doing this series.
Right.
But that all goes into my thinking. And hopefully in the future, as the teaching team progresses, it'll continue to be like that. So what it requires is a certain study of the congregation and you ask yourself and you ask, your team, what is it that the church needs to hear? And of course, we do sprinkle in topical series and some expositional series, that are based on various scripture passages will sound like a topical series, but they're really discrete passages in and of themselves. That's what we try to do. Sometimes we do more just topical stuff, but I try to focus on exposition.
And to give us the meat and potatoes.
The meat, the meat and potatoes are really
potatoes.
important because that's going to be
They
what
are,
builds
yeah.
believers. Yeah.
And the rice, if you're Latin.
Oh, yeah.
And the what?
The rice.
The rice, of course.
You
yeah.
need rice with every meal.
You need rice.
But, like,
yeah. Beans and
actually, though.
rice, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Arroz
whenever,
y frijoles.
it's so
Oh,
funny.
yeah.
Frijoles.
This is totally off topic, but I'm just going to go here.
Okay,
What?
do it.
Because we're talking about meat and potatoes. But growing up, whenever my stepdad cooked, it would be potatoes.
Really?
Yeah, and like no rice or anything. And I always thought that was so weird. And whenever my mom cooked, rice every meal.
Right.
Whenever
yeah, sure.
I've done that before, just like potatoes and a protein.
Yeah.
Like with some veggies.
And I'd go over to people's houses that were very like American, and they'd just have like potatoes, and
Yeah.
I'd be like, "Where's the rice?"
I thought the same thing,
There's
too, though.
supposed to be rice
Like, there's
here.
supposed to be rice at every meal. Rice and beans. What do you mean there's not that?
Yeah.
Well, I a little funny aside story too. I was in Central America, and I thought I'd be like really cool, chatting it up in Spanish. And so
Hola,
I went to this little
soy
vendor,
Armin.
and I wanted to buy some coffee beans. So I asked them in Spanish if they happened to have any frijoles de café, and they did exactly that.
Yeah.
They cracked up. I'm like, beans of coffee, and they're like, no, and I can't even remember how they corrected me, but it's frijoles are beans.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
beans,
not
beans.
like-
yeah,
they're not coffee beans.
No, no.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was
That's funny. Hey, it was a good shot. They knew what you were saying.
Yeah.
Well, they
Well,
would
they-
understand, but
Yeah.
it's still like.
but they
haha.
just thought I was really dumb.
Oh.
Well, ignorant,
Yeah.
which I was. So,
That's funny. So we got time for one more question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Who is it? It's me?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I mean, you're taking turns.
Yeah.
Okay.
We tried
A
to.
little
It doesn't know.
system.
Yeah,
Doesn't
it's a
always
little-
happen.
It's a little
Good.
system. Armin, since it ended with you, this is a big question.
Whoa.
Do you
Whoa.
want to ask it then?
I'm gonna ask it, and you don't have to answer it. You can be like, "That's a little bit too big for me to answer right now, Chris.
Okay.
I think I need some time to think about that one." But Paul gave his parting thoughts to the, Church of Corinth, and he was saying goodbye and stuff like that. And he was talking about some people who kind of like inspired him. You kind of gave that one already, but what are some things that you would want to like leave the church with?
You're talking about my final sermon.
Oh.
So that's like a spoiler.
Oh.
Should-
No, that's all right. I'll put
No,
it
we
in.
can leave it with a hook.
No, I'll put it in.
Okay, all right.
It's going to be Hebrews 12, 1 through 3.
Ooh.
Nice.
Where since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses,
Yeah.
throwing off every sin that so easily entangles us, and fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him, despised. Or actually, the word that he uses for despising, not despising the shame,
Yeah.
it's actually disregarding the shame. That's a more literal
Yeah.
thing. It's like, it's there, but he disregarded it,
Wow.
But what I'm probably going to focus on, I haven't written it yet. I'm going to be writing it this week and next week.
So these are like raw thoughts.
These
This
are
is
raw thoughts.
raw thoughts.
I'm gonna tell people, and I think the big idea is going to be something like this: fix your eyes on Jesus, no other man. Fix your eyes on no other man than Jesus.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Because people have a tendency to fix their eyes on the pastor. Some people will look at me because I've been there like forever. To some,
Pretty
in
much.
some people's minds,
Yeah.
a total
My
of
mind.
Well, it's funny. A total of 26 years, separated by 11 years in the middle.
Yeah.
So I go back to like 1984, which is like ancient,
Yeah.
and there are some people who will say, oh, well, he's not Armin, or he's not this
Yeah.
person, But what will be the greatest validation of my ministry is the less important I become in people's minds as I leave.
Yeah.
I mean,
The people who
I
can
won't
recognize
like that, but
people who
Like, it
can
might hurt my
recognize
pride a little bit.
that like as long as the word of God is being taught and
Yes.
as long as the
Yes.
church is being led according to the gospel, then like we're okay.
and don't fix your eyes on the new guy.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the, in fact, that's one of the advantages of our teaching team,
Yeah.
is that it's almost impossible just to focus on
One guy.
Right.
at this
Yeah.
point.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm happy with that because that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
It was hard for me when we first started to share.
Yeah.
Like when, I think I mentioned this in one of the recent podcasts, that when Pastor Shegun first started to speak, I'd listen to him and I'd think, gee, he took my message and improved it.
Yeah.
And it's better at the 6 p.m. than it was this morning. And I'm like,
Yeah. It's kind of cool because it like fights against the grain of celebrity pastors and
yes.
Right.
idolized pastor. Like, oh, but you haven't heard my pastor. My pastor is the best.
His like tone in that is like my pastor.
Well, it's like, I mean, I mentioned this on Sunday, that, in this age of technology, we have access to the best of the best of the best.
Yeah.
It's true.
And so you could have 5 or 6 of the best teachers possible.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation with somebody just on Saturday night. They had called me out of the blue, and I called him back, and because my phone was on silent, whatever it was. I called him back, and I said to him, hey, he was telling me about all the stuff that he was doing, but didn't mention anything about his spiritual life. I said, well, how are you doing? And I said, I haven't seen you at all.
Yeah.
I want to see your face back. And he said to me, well, I'm getting pretty much everything I need online. And I thought to myself, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And you can get the best that you can possibly get in terms of teaching online.
Yeah.
But you'll get, and I think I mentioned, I kind of raised my hand to like mid-chest level, and I said, you'll get this high.
Yeah.
But you can listen to mediocre teaching, but if you're in community with other people who are going to spur you on and sharpen you and be that third strand in your life, or that second strand in your life, like Ecclesiastes 4 talks about, you'll go even higher.
He put his hand around his head, so
Yeah.
like the difference between the mid chest. So
Yeah,
just
for those-
for
those
those of
who
you
are-
who can't see
You
what
need to
he's doing.
visualize this.
Yeah.
You know what? I just got a really weird visual in my head. I want
hands
to process it with you guys.
Okay.
Okay.
So, to the guy who's only listening to the online pastor, imagine him like a little sheep with like a VR headset on his face,
Virtual reality.
And like
Yeah.
he's like walking around like in the mountains, and and he feels like he's being led in the way in which he should go. But he doesn't have the flock around him to help guide him, and he
Yeah.
doesn't have the shepherd to actually protect him from the dangers that are immediately around
kind
him.
of
That's a good
blinded in
visual.
a
Yeah,
way.
he actually is.
And
Yeah.
he's blinded by the VR,
Right.
thinking that like he's in this reality that he's actually not. You know?
Wow.
Because I've bumped into
Yeah.
things with that, like
Yeah.
a VR.
Yeah.
headset
Well, you're
on.
essentially in
Yeah.
isolation. Like, you
Right.
think you're sensing all these things, but that's not reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Following
So-
God in virtual reality.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa.
Next sermon series, our
Yeah, I could.
Sheep with VR, and it's just like a sheep with like a.
Can you make that? Can you make
Oculus,
that
like-
graphic though?
That's so funny. Anyways, wow, I'm glad that sounded as good as it seemed in my head.
Yeah,
'Cause
it was.
in my head, I
For
was
sure.
like, this seems so sci-fi.
In fact, Chris was brilliant.
Wow, thank you, Armin. I just get your praise all the time.
Ready Disciple 1.
Oh,
Yeah,
good
one
reference.
player one.
Good reference.
Whoa.
Wow, this is the loudest our podcast has been this whole time.
so
That's
Yeah,
so
we
weird.
were just like, whoa. Mind blown.
Well, that's cool. You guys heard it here first. You heard some of Armin's parting thoughts, which is pretty cool. And now you get to wait to hear the finished sermon.
Unless they change it this week.
Unless
Yeah,
you
right. He
change it.
changes his mind, and then you're like, wait, I thought it was Hebrews.
But you can be like, well,
it's gonna be
I
Jesus
heard,
tomorrow.
I heard the alternate cut. You know, I heard the Armin cut originally.
The uncut.
Well, you know what one of the challenges is? I realize this has to be, it's my last Sunday. If anything, it has to be shorter.
Yeah,
It's got to be short and sweet.
concise.
Yeah, it really
that.
does because,
Kind of like the Gettysburg Address type of deal, where it's short and
well,
sweet to the
yeah,
point.
it won't be that short. But
Right.
I remember the Gettysburg Address, you see.
4 years ago.
Our fathers brought forth on this
What's
continent.
happening? A great
All right, everybody, calm down.
Yeah. My father
We're gonna
made
go
me
through the whole
memorize
day.
that a long
I had
time
to
ago.
memorize it in school, but I only
Yeah.
remember that first preamble.
Right.
But yeah, it'll it's going to be short. It'll be somewhat shorter, and I'll have some recollections in it. But it's going to be mainly exhortation, encouragement to the people.
That's good. That's awesome.
Anyway,
Well, thank you guys for joining us
Sure.
on Grace Speaks.
Yeah.
Everybody
Thanks
who's
for the
listening,
privilege.
and Armin, Armin,
Yeah.
for you joining us.
Armin, always a pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you
Up
want
to
to,
Alexa, Chris.
yes, if you want to catch us next time, this is where Alexa takes over.
Yes, so we podcast every second and fourth Friday, so you can catch our next episode, which will be behind the sermon, and then the guest will be a surprise because that's usually how we do it. So keep tuned in to find out who it will be, but it'll be about the next sermon series that we're getting into. So get excited for that.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Yep.
Thanks.